Hi, and a warm welcome to our brief session today. I've based this video on a question from our local startup community. Tobias Budig asked us a few weeks ago how to conduct a user test without biasing the tester. That's a tremendous fundamental question. Everyone involved should be sensible about this topic and the principles of biases. A small disclaimer up front: it's nearly impossible without any biases. But it's essential to know the biases and to be able to react and consider the influence. So let's see what a bias is. Here, a bias is a disproportionate weight in favor or against something. In the user research context, this can be an observation, an insight, or the tester itself. There are tons of different biases. Not all of them have to be present or can be present in an interview environment. And their impact is quite different. I have a graph. This shows a glimpse, and the related article is definitely worth a read. So let's focus on typical biases and how to face them. As often with biases, they are strongly connected to each other and hard to tackle entirely. Just learn about them, keep them in mind, and be aware that this is the way to counterbalance them nearly completely. And if we recap the situation, there is an interviewer and a tester. And even if they just met, there is a social relationship between those two. As you can imagine, the invited user is kind of in an unusual situation. It's not hard to believe that he or she does not want to offend the interviewer. And this is quite human behavior. And this brings us to our first thing to consider: the social desirability bias. The user will try to avoid awkward or hostile situations, and thus there will be an adjusted answer. So in general, they will try to answer in a way that is probably favorably by others. This has some significant impact on the interviews. So especially for startups or non-experienced researchers, I'll explain the pitfalls. The way you ask questions can influence the tester quite massive. So due to choice supportive bias, we tend to ask questions so the counterpart knows what we want to hear, because we describe the desired option more positively. Or the default effect, occurring if you leave it to the user to affirm the default option or answer it individually. This often leads to the choice of the least effort, which is the default option and does not help you get the valuable feedback you want to get. To avoid those, you should stick to very short, open questions and let the interviewee talk as much as possible. One further effect is framing. So at the beginning of your interview, you will set up the stage by explaining the context, the story behind it. To get valid results, you should try to be brief, precise, and realistic. If you set up a scenario that is too far apart from the tester's life, you will get more guesswork than insights in this case. So be aware. A test is mostly to validate or to falsify existing hypotheses. Thus, you should take care of how narrow you set up the spotlight of questions and parts of the product you test. Because if you set this focus to too small, you will end up with insights biased by the restricted context, which does not include other adjacent parts, so like other features strongly connected, for example, or the use case itself. As all of you know, sometimes it's hard to remember things. There are several cognitive effects on your brain, and you have to take them into account. Therefore, you should try to avoid the recall bias. The longer an event is passed, the more it's probably memorized more positive or negative than actually happened. So if you do questions about the context, try to ask about very recent events. You even could try to screen this while recruiting your testing participants. Last but not least, a crucial thing for startups: some biases are occurring on high fidelity prototypes. I know from my experience with many companies and startups, there's a massive pushback to test early prototypes and concepts. Everything should look shiny and work well, and the effect arising from this is based on the social desirability bias. The tester does not want to give you destructive feedback. So if you present a shiny prototype, they subconsciously are pushed back to provide the input, which would lead to significant changes. This effect is even higher if the tester knows you are the developer, the designer, or the founder. Because, the user does not want to hurt your feelings or criticize your work. To tackle this, don't try to be shinier as needed, and dare to test even a hand-drawn wireframe or concept prototype. Because you want this honest feedback to make the right shiny thing. Based on those 5 hints about typical influences and biases on the tester during an interview, I hope you can boost your next user test and get some new, less biased insights. Especially for startups in the early stages, I want to close this video with a short book recommendation. If you ask your mom whether your startup is a great idea, she probably agrees. So the book, The Mom Test, shows you how to conduct problem interviews and more to get more valuable answers. Check out the book. Thanks for listening.